Life in my house has started to become twisted as of a few months ago. The amount of strange and psychotic incidents I've dealt with seem to grow by the day. My 6-year-old daughter, Brandy, used to be a heavy sleeper before all this started. She would fall asleep on the couch while watching TV, and I would often end up carrying her to her bed. Lately, she never sleeps. Every time I wake up in the master bedroom, I'd catch a glimpse of a small face peeking through the door, silently disappearing into the shadows of the house, unrestrained glee on that small face. My wife had the most severe personality change of all. She wasn't the woman that I married. All the warmth, compassion, and humanity had suddenly disappeared, leaving some monstrous shell behind. Like my daughter, she never seemed to sleep anymore. She would disappear into the dark forest behind the house at night, wandering in her nightgown, barefoot, like a pale ghost, disappearing into the mist. One night, I remember waking up from a nightmare. The bathroom light dimly illuminated the master bedroom where I slept. I turned to my wife and found her already awake, staring at me with an insane expression, her eyes bulging out of their sockets. A wide, lunatic grin spread across her face. I sat straight up in bed, my heart palpitating with fear. "Is something wrong?" I asked. But she continued to stare at me with that inhuman expression, her eyes gleaming. "Emma, are you okay?" I felt something wet and sticky soaking into my t-shirt. I looked down on the bed and saw a freshly killed possum laying between us, its head twisted around, its torso sliced down the middle. Intestines spilled out onto the sheet, staining them. The smell of blood and death hit me all at once, and I jumped out of bed without another word, grabbing new clothes and running to the bathroom. I locked myself in, hyperventilating for a few minutes. Once I managed to calm down some, I checked the lock again and stripped off and took a long shower, wiping the blood off my skin. No matter how much soap I used, though, I still felt stained. When I was done, I opened the door a tiny crack and peered through. The bedroom looked empty. I had no idea where my wife was, and I didn't really care. I quickly ran to the guest bedroom, locking the door behind me, and for the last couple of months I've slept there every night. A can of mace on the nightstand next to my bed, a brand new deadbolt on the door. The next morning, I met my friend Richie at the local diner. I'd called out sick from work, and as I sat in the booth waiting for him to arrive, my hands shook uncontrollably. I spilled coffee on the table, and on myself, more than a few times. I hadn't slept since the incident, and was only running on a couple of hours. I saw him arrive, striding through the front door, wearing a t-shirt to show off the tattoos on his arms. With his dirty blonde hair and blue eyes, he had a very Irish cast to his face. He sat down across from me, looking me up and down and quickly frowning. He saw all the spill marks on the table, the napkins I'd used to half-assedly clean it up, my trembling hands and sunken, tired eyes. I'm sure I was quite a sight. "What's up, Thorne?" he asked, not smiling. Like a lot of my friends, he always calls me by my last name rather than Julius. I shook my head. "I don't know, man. Some weird stuff's going on. Like really weird. I'm scared. I really am." He nodded. "Yeah, I can tell. You know, I'm always here for you. Whatever you need, just call me." "Thanks," I said, trying to smile. "Now, why don't you tell me what's going on? I'm all ears. Tell me everything. Maybe we can figure something out." At that moment, the waitress came, taking our orders and bringing Richie some coffee. Once she was gone, I told him everything that had happened. I didn't leave out a single detail. By the time I was done, our breakfast had arrived, and we were both on a third cup of coffee. I still felt drained. The caffeine seemed to make me feel more tired, if anything. Richie said thoughtfully, eating a piece of bacon. He stared across the room, his eyes looking 1,000 miles away. That's weird. I think it's more than weird. It's psychotic. I'm scared to go home. I'm scared to be in the same room with my own wife and daughter. Yeah, he said, nodding, as he chugged the rest of his burning hot coffee in one long swallow. It is. Psychotic, I mean. What do you think is happening? The question caught me by surprise, and I choked a little on my coffee. Me? I've got no idea what's happening. All I know is my wife and daughter have turned into lunatics. If it was just one of them acting weird, maybe I'd think it was mental illness, schizophrenia or something. He smiled slightly at that, but his eyes remained grave. I think the seriousness with which he took the situation freaked me out as much as the situation itself. But it's not one, it's both. And yet, not you. You seem totally fine. What's your point? I asked. Well, if it's some sort of strange drug in the water, all three of you would be affected. You all eat and drink the same stuff, right? And if it was mental illness, likely it would only be one of your family members. I mean, what are the chances that two people would develop a serious psychotic disorder at the same time, right? Schizophrenia is extremely rare in children anyway. So what does that leave? I asked. He shrugged. I don't know. Maybe body snatchers or aliens or mad scientists cloning people in a secret government experiment? Who the hell knows? I laughed at that. Hearing it put into words made it sound totally insane. Aliens? Body snatchers, I said. That's all science fiction crap. This is real, man. It's real, and I don't know what to do. You should leave your house immediately. You can stay with me for a few days, Richie said. I shook my head. I can't just leave my family behind. Realizing how feeble an argument that was. I had just said these people weren't my family after all. But Richie understood. You mean you can't leave until you find out what might have happened? He asked. My head slumped, all the tiredness and fear from the past week leaving me lethargic and bone-tired. I can't just leave, I said again, feeling for all the world like a prisoner. Things began to get strange after that. Pets began to disappear all across the neighborhood, and I'd see signs for missing dogs and cats up and down the block. Normally, Emma would have become despondent over this. She was an animal lover who often donated to charities for homeless people or abandoned pets. She had an ASPCA sticker on her car, but as I had known from the start of all this, there was no Emma living in my house anymore. During the first days, I thought maybe some toxin in the food or water had caused brain damage or personality changes in my family. Maybe it was an intentional release of some chemical weapon by the government or a terrorist group. All those thoughts passed through my head, but my intuition told me over and over that these were dead ends or red herrings. The truth was, these people weren't my family. I knew it in my heart from the very beginning. I could see it in the way their eyes gleamed during the night as they crept around the house, never sleeping, moving as silently as cats stalking prey. I would hear floorboards creak outside the door as one or maybe both of them stood there for hours on end in the middle of the night. My heart would begin to beat faster. Dark bags began to form under my eyes as I slept less and less. The only release I had was work, but every night I'd come back to these people I didn't know, but who looked identical to my family. I lost weight from the stress and began to smoke heavily. Normally, Emma hated it when I smoked, and she never allowed it in the house. Now I chain smoked inside, and she didn't even notice. She and Brandy barely talked anymore, even to each other. When they did speak, their sentences were short, clipped, and bizarre. A month ago, I was sitting in the guest bedroom, smoking and reading some Philip K. Dick. I had The Three Stigmas of Palmer Eldritch in my hand, which, ironically, was a story about a man who's been replaced by an advanced alien civilization. It struck a little too close to home, and I put it down, just staring out the window, the dim lamp I kept on through the night, giving the room a yellow glow. That's when I saw her. My wife was creeping out the basement door, barefoot, an insane smile plastered across her face. Her eyes looked around. She looked like a maniac who's trying to keep herself from descending into uncontrollable laughter. I wonder what she finds so amusing, I whispered to myself bitterly, feeling cold hatred and spite towards these two strange people who had taken over my house. I saw her start towards the woods behind the house, taking a small dirt trail that ran towards a nature preserve a mile away. At that moment, totally fed up and ready for this madness to be at an end, I resolved to follow her. I got up out of bed, wincing as the springs groaned. I wondered if my daughter would be waiting outside the door with a knife in her hand, ready to cut me open like my wife did to that poor possum. I heard a floorboard creak directly outside my door, and a slight, barely audible sound follow it. Sounded like giggling, a little girl quietly laughing, and I swore under my breath. "To hell with it," I whispered, going to the window and opening it. The wood shrieked loudly, and I winced, looking back over at the door. There was no response from the other side, though. "You're afraid of a little girl finding out that you're leaving? You're a grown man," I told myself, smiling at the absurdity of it. But when I remembered Brandy's cold, insane eyes, the smile went away. Yeah, I was afraid of that little girl. I had no idea what she was capable of. I looked down, and it was only a second-story drop. Below the window was soft earth and grass. I slowly climbed out, hanging myself from the window and letting myself fall. I felt myself fall for a few moments and wondered if I would regret it. Images of my leg bones breaking and poking out through the skin ran through my head, and when I hit the ground, I rolled and hit the dirt. I landed hard on my back, knocking the wind out of my lungs. I lay there for a few seconds, breathing hard, then pushed myself up and began to follow my wife. I was wearing only slippers and boxers and a t-shirt. Wasn't exactly dressed for reconnaissance work, but then again, neither was she. I glanced at the house, and from my daughter's window I thought I saw a small face staring down at me, grinning like a jack-o'-lantern. An expression of barely contained glee and bloodlust marred her childish face. But when I looked back up, the window was empty. I figured my mind was playing tricks on me, but it still shook me badly. I had never imagined I would be so afraid of a little girl as I was right then. I tried to move as fast as I could without making a sound, hoping I could catch up with my wife. The half moon gave me some bare light that streamed through the trees. I used it to avoid the rocks and tree roots that jutted out of the earth. After a few minutes, I heard an eerie sound coming from in front of me. It was humming. I caught a glimpse of my wife, pale and white, her nightgown billowing around her thin frame. She stared straight ahead, her eyes not seeming to blink. She veered off the trail, and I followed from a safe distance, trying to keep myself hidden behind the trees. It felt like dozens of eyes watched my every movement, but I brushed it off as paranoia. She trampled through brush and pricker bushes, not seeming to notice the thorns and whipping branches. I tried to avoid the obstacles while still keeping her in view. We went uphill for a while, and to me, her choice of direction seemed totally random. Then she stopped, the humming cutting off mid-note, and she knelt down, sighing in pleasure. She began to play with something white lying on the ground under a small pile of leaves and brush. She carefully brushed the remnants of the disintegrated leaves and soil off the object. From behind the tree, I couldn't see what it was. She ran it through her fingers, stroking it lovingly, even kissing it. After what I felt like was an eternity, she put it back down, turning around to start back towards the house. She passed within 20 feet of me, and I hid behind the largest tree in the immediate area, moving behind the trunk as she passed and praying that no twigs would snap and give me away. None did, and I watched her descend into the fog and trees. As soon as I was sure she was gone, I crept towards the spot that I'd seen her crouch. A bone lay there, thin and long, still covered in a piece of rotting flesh. In horror, I knelt down, examining it closer. It looked too large to be an animal bone, though perhaps it could have come from a deer. Underneath, I saw the earth had been recently disturbed. It looked as if it had been dug up and filled back in again. I went back to the house and grabbed a shovel from the shed, determined to solve the mystery. The dark house loomed over me, the windows looking down on me like pupils, hiding what lay behind them. When I got back to the site of the bone, I started digging. The earth was soft and fresh, and it didn't take long to get a large hole started. But I found nothing in the first half hour. Covered in sweat and breathing heavily, I took a breath, then went back to the task. Once I'd gotten down about 5 feet, I saw something besides dirt and small stones. At first I couldn't tell what it was, but it emanated a fluorescent day-glow color. Then with horror, I realized it was my daughter's favorite t-shirt. I kept pulling dirt off and soon found 2 bodies in the pit. It was Emma and Brandy, their throats cut wide open, their staring eyes covered in earth. I turned and vomited on the forest floor, feeling I might collapse at any moment. Waves of hopelessness, confusion, and anger consumed me in turn. Staggering, I ran out of the woods, going to a neighbor's house and frantically knocking on the door. It was 3 a.m. and it took a while to get a response. Finally, my neighbor, an old retired guy, came to the door. "Al, thank God," I said. His tired, bloodshot eyes looked at me for a long time. "Julius, it's a bit late for a visit," he said. "It's an emergency. Can I use your phone for a minute? I need the police here immediately." His eyes widened at first, and he looked wide awake a moment later. Sure, come on in." As soon as I entered, he closed and locked the door behind me. He pointed towards the kitchen. "Phone's in there, hanging on the wall next to the door." I thanked him profusely, visions of my murdered family members running through my head. Then I dialed the police, my fingers shaking so badly that it took me a few tries. Finally, though, I heard it began to ring, and at that moment, I wondered what exactly I would say. Good evening, everyone. It's me, Dr. Plague. Thank you so much for joining me for tonight's video. If you still feel like you could do with a little more spooky in your life, why not click on one of the videos that's appearing on your screen? If you're not subscribed, why not go ahead and subscribe so you don't miss any of the stories we put on here. I make new videos 7 days a week, and I wouldn't want you to miss a one of them. So if you'd like to support the channel, why not go ahead and subscribe? Maybe hit that notification bell so you don't miss any of the great stuff we do here. And of course, if you'd like to support the channel in a more financial way, you could always become a member on YouTube or on Patreon. Spooky Skeletons, that's my $5 members, always get their videos early, as opposed to in the evening. And we've got lots of other cool stuff that you can take advantage of. Just go down to Patreon and give it a look, or become a member on YouTube. Speaking of all of our wonderful patrons and YouTube members, let's go ahead and thank them right now. Thanks to Unicorn Hollow, our Spooky Ghost contributor. Thanks to our Spooky Skeleton contributors, Janice, Lee Kendall, and Saikat. Thanks to our Ghostly Reader contributors, Hi Stacy, Winter, Xaronan, Emily Coltsfoot, Stephanie Carrington, Tyler Parker, Cinnamon Fox, and Sarah SAMR42. Thanks, guys. We just couldn't do the show without you. Again, if you'd like to support the show in a more monetary fashion, there are links below to Patreon, and you can just go to YouTube and click on membership, if that's something that interests you. There's also links to my latest book below if you'd like to go have a look on Amazon. It should show you the other books I've got as well, so why not go ahead and get the whole collection. And as always, thanks for stopping by. Dr. Plague, signing off. Have a wonderful evening.